The small living room seemed to breathe only dust and memory. Mary would sit at the edge of her old sofa, her hands resting on her knees, eyes fixed on the empty chair across the room, the one where her husband, Thomas, used to sit every night. The cushion still carried the faint shape of his body, as if the fabric itself refused to forget. Sometimes, when the wind brushed through the half-closed window, the curtains would move softly, and she'd imagine it was him passing by. Her lips would almost form his name, but the sound would dissolve before leaving her throat. The silence afterward felt heavier than any word could bear. The television stood turned off for months. She couldn't stand the voices, the laughter, the noise that mocked her solitude. Only the ticking of a clock accompanied her, a cruel rhythm that marked every second of absence. At night, she would look at the empty chair again before turning off the light, whispering quietly, "Good night, my love." And though she knew there would be no answer, she couldn't stop. It was her last fragile bridge between the living and the lost. The chair remained still, faithful, silent, and full of memories. It was the first witness of her loneliness, the silent guardian of her pain. When dawn crept through the curtains, Mary didn't open her eyes right away. The light no longer meant a new beginning. It was just another reminder that she had survived another night she didn't ask to live through. The kettle on the stove sat untouched most mornings. Tea no longer had taste. Breakfast no longer had meaning. She would walk slowly around the house, touching the furniture like someone searching for proof that they still existed. Sometimes she would sit by the window, watching people pass by on their way to work, children laughing on the street, cars moving toward destinations she couldn't imagine. Life went on, loud, careless, and distant. She felt invisible among it all, a shadow watching the world that had forgotten her. Her Bible lay open on the small table by her chair, the same page, untouched for weeks. The words blurred when she tried to read. Her eyes were too tired and her soul too numb. She whispered, "What am I still here for?" But the room gave no answer. Every clock tick was another reminder that time moved, even when her heart didn't. The days blended into one another, a long stretch of waiting for something she couldn't name. Calls stop coming, visits fade. The world seems to move on without her. The phone sat on the small table near the window, silent for weeks. Once it had rung often, friends checking in, neighbors asking how she was. But slowly the calls grew fewer. People meant well, but life had its own pace, and hers had stopped. Her church friends came less and less. At first, they brought flowers and prayers. Later, just quick hugs and promises to visit again soon. The last one came 3 months ago. Since then, only silence. Even her daughter, busy in another city, spoke through short messages. "Love you, Mom. Busy week. Talk soon." Mary would stare at the words for a long time, then lock the phone and press it against her heart as if it could fill the distance. She didn't blame anyone. She understood how life pulled people away. Yet, understanding didn't ease the ache. Loneliness doesn't ask for logic, only presence. And in that absence, she began to wonder if she'd already disappeared, if maybe the world had simply moved on without noticing she was still breathing. In her reflection, she no longer recognizes the woman she once was. Joy has left her eyes. One morning, while washing her face, Mary caught her reflection in the small mirror above the sink. For a long moment, she didn't know who the woman was. Her hair had grown thin and grey, her shoulders curved forward, her eyes dull like glass left in the rain. She leaned closer. There was no trace of the bright smile that once lit up her face when Thomas walked through the door. Her hands trembled as she touched her cheek, the skin soft but lifeless. She remembered how he used to call her beautiful, even when she wore her oldest house dress. She used to laugh at him for saying it. Now, the memory hurt more than it comforted. A whisper left her lips. "Where did I go?" The question was too big for the small bathroom. It echoed softly, then vanished. For the first time, she realized her grief had stolen more than her joy. It had taken her identity. What remained was only a shell, waiting for something to wake her again. Mary wonders if her prayers still rise beyond the ceiling of her small room. Each night, she would kneel by the side of her bed. It wasn't out of habit anymore, just a remnant of what she used to do. Her words were few, almost mechanical. "Thank you, Lord. Be with me." But deep down, she didn't feel anything move. Sometimes, when she finished praying, she would stare at the ceiling and whisper, "Did you hear me?" The silence that followed was her answer, thick and endless. She remembered the days when she could sense God near, in the laughter of her husband, in the warmth of family dinners, in the beauty of small things. Now everything sacred seemed gone, hidden behind the fog of loss. Faith used to be light. Now it was weight, heavy, quiet, and uncertain. She began to wonder if heaven had closed its doors to her, if maybe, in her grief, she had simply become invisible to God. Tears fall onto her old Bible. She whispers that she can't go on. That night was colder than most. The wind howled through the cracks of her window, and Mary pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. On the small table beside her bed, the Bible lay open where it had fallen earlier that day. She looked at it for a long time, tears blurring the page. Her voice trembled as she said, "I can't do this anymore." There was no anger in her tone, only exhaustion, deep and quiet. Her body ached. Her soul felt heavier than her years. She thought of Thomas and the years they had built together. She whispered his name once more, and her chest tightened. For the first time, she wished she wouldn't wake up the next morning. The thought frightened her, but it felt strangely peaceful, like rest. Her last tear fell on the open page, soaking the thin paper. She closed her eyes, unaware that heaven was listening closer than she thought. Even God seems far. The quiet feels unbearable. The morning after her breaking night, Mary sat in her chair, staring at the window that framed a grey sky. Birds sang somewhere far away, but the sound felt unreachable, like a melody meant for someone else. She spoke no prayer that day. The words felt heavy, hollow. Her heart was tired of echoing into emptiness. Every attempt at faith seemed to dissolve in the air before it reached the heavens. She looked at her Bible again, the same page stained by her tears. The verse was unreadable now, blurred and wrinkled. It seemed to mirror her soul, worn, watermarked, silent. When night came again, she didn't pray. She simply whispered, "If you're there, I can't feel you." Then she lay down, the room dark except for the faint moonlight crawling across the floor. It was a silence that could break a soul, the kind that tests the deepest parts of faith, not through storms, but through absence. With trembling lips, she says only, "Jesus, if you still see me, please, don't leave me alone." 2 nights later, something within her stirred, not strength, but need. She couldn't explain why, but her heart began to whisper again. Her hands clasped weakly, her eyes closed, and her voice came out in fragments. "Jesus, if you still see me, please, don't leave me alone." It wasn't a prayer of eloquence, only of surrender. Every word carried both fear and hope. It was the cry of a heart that no longer knew how to believe, yet refused to stop reaching. Tears returned, but they were softer this time, less like despair, more like release. The air around her felt still, almost listening, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel entirely alone after speaking his name. In the darkness, something soft surrounds her. Warmth without source, peace without reason. It happened quietly. No thunder, no voice from the heavens, only a gentle stillness. Mary was sitting in bed, eyes half closed, when she noticed a faint glow filling the room. It wasn't from the lamp, that had been off for hours. It was softer than light, yet brighter than shadow. The air grew warm, as if the cold itself had stepped back. Her breathing slowed. She didn't dare move. It wasn't fear. It was awe. She couldn't explain it, but deep inside she knew. She was not alone. Her pain didn't vanish, but it no longer felt empty. The silence was still there, yet it was different now, full, present. Her tears flowed again, but these were not of grief. They were of recognition. Something holy had entered her night. No words, only stillness, yet she knows he is there. For a long time Mary stayed like that, eyes closed, heart open. She didn't see a figure, didn't hear a voice, yet her soul felt the unmistakable touch of love. It wasn't the kind of presence that could be proven or described. It was quiet, deeper than sound, softer than thought, like someone sitting beside her, unseen, but undeniably there. Her breathing slowed into peace. The weight that had crushed her chest for months began to lift. She whispered again, this time not in plea, but in wonder, Jesus. And though the room remained silent, she sensed a response. Not in words, but in warmth, as if his heart had reached hers without needing speech. For the first time since her husband's passing, she didn't feel afraid of the night. She leaned back on her pillow and let peace find her. Her chest feels lighter, as if someone touched her heart from the inside. When morning came, the light through the window looked different, softer, more alive. Mary sat up slowly, her hands resting over her chest. There was a warmth there, as if something had quietly healed overnight. She couldn't explain it. There had been no dream, no vision, yet she felt touched, not on her skin, but in her soul. It was as though a hand had reached gently into her heart and lifted a burden she didn't know how to put down. As she breathed, peace followed every inhale, like air had become grace. The heaviness that once defined her mornings was gone. In its place was stillness, not empty, but filled with presence. She whispered, "You're here, aren't you?" And though no sound came back, the quiet answered. Something had shifted, not around her, but within her. The sorrow was still there, but no longer sharp. It had softened, like a scar that no longer hurt to touch. She remembers her husband's kindness, but this love feels deeper, eternal. That day she found herself looking at old photos again, the kind she had avoided for months. Thomas smiling in the garden, waving his hat in the sunlight. His laughter seemed to echo faintly in her memory. But as she gazed at the pictures, something surprising happened. The ache was still there, yet it wasn't unbearable. Instead, it was wrapped in tenderness, like her grief had been transformed into gratitude. She realized that what she missed most wasn't gone. It had only changed form. The love that once walked beside her now seemed to surround her, unseen yet stronger than before. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they carried light. She smiled softly and said, "Thank you, Jesus, for reminding me of love." She felt it then, that the love she shared with Thomas had always come from the same source now comforting her. Eternal, unbroken, divine, the same space yet alive, the same air yet full of presence. In the days that followed, Mary began to notice small things, the way sunlight painted gold on her curtains, the scent of coffee filling her kitchen, the laughter of children outside her window. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt new. Her home, once so silent, now seemed to breathe again. Even the ticking clock, which used to torment her with its loneliness, sounded like rhythm instead of emptiness. She started humming while she tidied her things, something she hadn't done in years. The melody came naturally, soft and sweet, almost as if someone were humming along. At night, when she sat in her chair, she no longer spoke to an absence. She simply whispered, "Thank you for staying." And peace would settle around her like a gentle blanket. The same room, the same life, but now filled with unseen company, a quiet, holy companionship. For the first time in years, she sleeps without fear of waking alone. That night Mary prepared for bed differently. She didn't rush to close the curtains or hide from the shadows. The darkness no longer frightened her. It felt soft, almost sacred. She prayed slowly, not begging this time, only thanking. "Thank you for being here, even when I couldn't feel you." When she lay down, her mind didn't wander through old wounds. She simply breathed. Each breath was peace, each moment presence. The silence that had once haunted her now felt like a friend. And as her eyes closed, she smiled faintly, not because her pain had vanished, but because she knew she wasn't bearing it alone. She drifted to sleep without fear, wrapped in a calm she couldn't explain. Heaven had entered her night, not with thunder but with stillness. The sun seems gentler, almost as if it carries a promise. The next morning, sunlight spilled through Mary's window in a way she hadn't noticed in years. It wasn't just brightness. It was warmth, delicate and alive. She watched the light stretch across her table, touching the old Bible that still lay open, its pages slightly curled from tears past. For the first time, she didn't turn her face away. She lifted her hand toward the light, feeling its quiet embrace. It was as though the dawn itself had come to remind her life was not finished. Outside, she could hear the faint sound of a neighbor's laughter, the bark of a distant dog, the hum of life continuing, and this time it didn't hurt. It comforted her. The world, which had once seemed cruel in its indifference, now appeared sacred in its ordinariness. Every sound, every beam of light, every breath felt like a small mercy. She whispered softly, "Thank you, Lord, for another morning." And the light seemed to glow a little brighter. She feels able to rise, to make tea, to pray. Small miracles reborn. There was no grand revelation that day, no burst of energy. Just a quiet strength that carried her through the morning. She stood, folded her blanket and made her way to the kitchen. Her steps were slow but steady, each one a victory of grace. She boiled water, dropped a tea bag into her favorite cup, and watched the steam rise. That simple act, once meaningless, felt holy now, a communion between her soul and the one who had stayed through the night. Her prayer was short but full. "Be with me today." And somehow she knew he would. When she looked out the window, she saw the same street, the same trees, the same world. But her heart saw something different, possibility. She realized faith wasn't always about great leaps. Sometimes it was just about standing up again. She smiled as she sipped her tea, tasting peace in every drop. She writes words of comfort to another widow. She wants to share hope. That afternoon, Mary remembered her neighbor, Mrs. Green, who had lost her husband not long after Thomas passed. She had seen her once at the mailbox, eyes red, voice trembling, before retreating quickly indoors. Mary had wanted to speak to her, but grief had silenced both of them then. Now she felt something gentle stirring in her heart, compassion reborn. She sat at her small desk, took out a piece of paper, and began to write. Her hand trembled, but her words flowed easily. "I don't know if this helps, but I've learned we are never as alone as we feel. Sometimes the silence hides a presence we can't see, yet it's the same presence that keeps us breathing." She signed it simply, "With love, Mary." When she slipped the envelope under Mrs. Green's door, her heart felt light. She had given something she herself had once lost: hope. She no longer asks for proof. She knows Jesus is with her, even in silence. That evening, Mary sat once more in her chair, the same chair where her sorrow had begun. The lamp was off. Only the moonlight filled the room, quiet and pale. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Every breath, every heartbeat felt like prayer. She knew now that Jesus didn't always come with signs or voices. Sometimes he came as peace itself. There was a moment when she felt something, a soft breeze. Though the windows were closed, it brushed her cheek like a hand. She smiled, not surprised anymore. She simply whispered, "I know it's you." No vision, no sound, just presence, holy and ordinary at once. For the first time, she realized faith was not about seeing. It was about trusting that he was there, even when all seemed still. The grief remains, but it no longer hurts the same. It's softened by love. The days passed quietly after that night, each one marked not by loneliness, but by a deep calm. The memories of Thomas still came, but they no longer pierced her. They simply rested beside her like gentle companions. She would sit by the window with her tea, watching the world move, the clouds drifting, children running, neighbors laughing. Once such sights had made her ache. Now they made her smile. She understood now that peace didn't mean forgetting, it meant remembering differently, with gratitude, not despair. Love hadn't left her. It had changed its form. There were still moments when tears came, but they fell quietly like soft rain, not from pain, but from tenderness. Each tear seemed to carry both memory and mercy. And through it all, one certainty remained steady within her heart. She was never alone again. When the evening comes again, she smiles. She is not alone anymore. That evening Mary returned to her chair, the same one that had once witnessed her grief, now turned into a place of prayer. The Bible still lay nearby, open to the same tear-stained page. She didn't read, she simply rested her hand upon it. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. The air was cool, but not cold. It carried peace, the kind that lingers, quiet and sure. She closed her eyes and whispered softly, "Thank you for staying." The room felt alive again, wrapped in a presence beyond words. The clock ticked on. Time still moved, but her soul had stopped measuring loss and started counting grace. When she looked toward the empty chair across from her, she didn't see absence anymore. She saw companionship, unseen but real. Her heart smiled before her lips did. And as night settled once more, she breathed a final whisper, "I'm home."